loving me, I loving you. Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life won't live in the past.
It's time for another conversation. Welcome to Making It Last podcast, where it's all about helping us to have better relationships, not just with ourselves, with other people. No, a lot of time people continue to have challenges with COVID, but for me, COVID has helped me to be introduced to a lot of people from all over the place. And Jonathan is one of them. Jonathan Joseph. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I couldn't agree more. I think COVID has been such a chaotic pause in many ways, and for all the bad comes a lot of good. And part of that good is having great conversations like these. So I'm really excited to join you today.
Yes. So he is the CEO of Little Red Fashion. No, what is that? Before we get into what we're going to talk about.
Certainly. Really quick, Little Red Fashion is the first children's fashion education publishing and technology company in history. And we are creating over a dozen augmented reality enhanced children's books to teach kids about the ins and outs of the fashion industry through a lens of self-empowering diversity, equity, inclusion, and sustainability beyond buzzwords, and really taking them into actionable ways to explore the world around them through the lens of fashion.
Interesting. Why that particular market though?
Sure. For one thing, unlike other creative forms of expression, whether it be painting, sculpture, music, children who are interested in fashion typically suffer from a lack of materials that are made just for them to learn about the ins and outs of that field and that craft and the adjacent fields that surround it, like photography or even STEM fields like sciences. If we want to talk about how textiles are created or dyed or changed. And so fashion is a way for kids to relate to the world around them that's instantly relatable because we all get dressed every morning. And I also think from a diversity standpoint, clothes are a unique way to talk about the cultures that we come from, to celebrate our heritage, and to talk about how we fashion identity. And so Little Red Fashion is a great vehicle for brokering all types of really important conversations.
Okay. And if this is something we could do at the end, but we're going to do it right now. If there's somebody who actually wants to know more about this, where can they find you?
Oh, sure. We're on all sorts of platforms. We are at littleredfashion.com and at Instagram at littleredfashionco.com. And starting in a few weeks, our podcast drops. So I'll be joining your august ranks as a podcaster on all streaming platforms for our Little Red Village podcast, which gets insights from industry professionals about how they got into the industry and ways to inspire kids who are interested in doing what they might do in the future.
Okay, good stuff. All right, so we're going to be talking about why should one aim to thrive through adversity?
Oh man, I mean, how can you not? I think we're called to thrive by our very existence. I think for anyone who's been part of a historically marginalized group, sometimes your very existence is a political act in the world that we live in. And so thriving through adversity is for many not a choice. And for many of us from historically marginalized groups is this constant journey of unlearning subconscious biases against ourselves and parts of ourselves that have been put into us by society or culture or the media. And thriving then becomes a choice that we have to make, and finding tools and coping mechanisms and skills to empower that highest self is really what I think it's all about. I think so many of us are searching for that thing, whether it's, purpose is one thing, but creating the crucible where that purpose can be found and can flourish is another. And I think thriving through adversity is about figuring out how to make that crucible for yourself, how to surround yourself with the right things to step into that mindset of thriving over surviving.
So before we get into that thriving over, give me some background in terms of why you're able to speak about this particular issue.
Sure. In some ways, I never knew a life without adversity. I was born in Medellin, Colombia in 1986, and was promptly born and left on the steps of an orphanage where I was later, connected with my amazing, beautiful, wonderful adoptive parents 9 months later, who brought me to the United States. Let me backtrack. Actually, they found me about at 5 months old, and then by the time we went through the whole international adoption process, I was 9 months old when I came to the United States. And particularly as a special needs child who was born with ataxic cerebral palsy, and for your listeners who may not be familiar, cerebral palsy is an umbrella term for a number of maladies that affect the brainstem, the brain, and the central nervous system in particular. My type, ataxic cerebral palsy, is focused on the cerebellum and affects my depth perception, my balance, the way my trunk and lower body are aligned. I was born with my feet kind of, stumbling over themselves. So had a childhood full of leg braces, which is actually how I started my life in fashion, but that's another story. They are connected. And so overcoming the adversity, overcoming living with a neurological and physical disability is an interesting thought. I was raised to believe that I could do anything that I wanted, that my perceptible physical limitations were there. There was no denialism or anything unhealthy, but the idea was that, there is a way for me to do everything that everyone else does. It might not be the same, adaptability is a thing, but I was very lucky in that my mom was very, very much empowering in that sense. One of the ways that she empowered my cerebral palsy as a kid who, anyone who's been around kids knows they're not always the kindest for people who are different. And so I definitely had my overwhelming share of bullying related to my leg braces or my eye patch or my thick glasses or these things, or the combination of all three. And so to mitigate that, my mother suggested one day, let's cover those leg braces with socks, these tall, colorful socks. And I just kind of took to them. I just started really getting into the sock thing because I thought, oh my God, these colors are so fun. It's fun to like match the outfits. And I didn't even really at the time as a child, thinking back now, process like it was armor. This idea of fashion as armor, of dressing as armor, and as an opportunity for ourselves to make the presence we want to put out into the world. But now on the other side of my work with literary fashion, it's so obvious to me, like, oh my God, that's what I was doing, was fashioning my identity. And I was turning and transmuting this thing that initially worked against me, so to speak, by way of my leg braces, and I through fashion adorned them in a way that made me feel powerful, that made me feel like I had agency over something, my disability, that would normally make me feel like I was stripped of agency. And I think that's really important and really powerful. I think that particularly as the son of a father who is an immigrant to the United States, who's from Iran, there's certain cultural challenges also that go along with disability, whether it surrounds issues of pain or shame or guilt. And so being able to also push through that was something that I didn't learn, until later in life, until I was older. I think as a kid, adults do their best to shield you from the worst of things while giving you enough of a working knowledge of self to try and hope that you'll do right by the time you're on your own. And so I think as far as my disability is concerned, my parents were really good about that. And I was very fortunate to have, quality healthcare and access to all these other privileges in terms of occupational therapy, physical therapy, et cetera, where for the most part, now as an adult, I don't wear leg braces. I don't use any assistive devices. For many people are often surprised when they learn that I have a disability. And I think it bears talking about because there are so many people, millions of people who live with invisible disabilities. And so often I find that conversation is not really out there that much because we focus on people who have disabilities that you can see that are much more tangible, if you will.
Okay. Throughout the pandemic and just in life, there are a lot of terms that we use loosely. One of them is the whole idea of thriving. Are you thriving or are you surviving? We're going to continue that whole conversation about thriving through adversity right after this short break with a word from our partners.
Photography is an art, but more so, photography must come from the heart. Precious moments, priceless times. Take a pic and know it will turn out fine.
BMC Photography JA. Beautiful moments captured. Let's go.
For all your events such as educational forums, workshops, book launches, weddings, and more, contact Noreen Daly, the ultimate MC and event host. Visit noreendaily.com or follow her on Instagram at Noreen Daily Jam. Noreen Daily, creating long-lasting memories.
Are you looking for one-of-a-kind products customized to suit your needs? Then shop at Trending Things, the place where customization is always an option. From personalized gifts to apparel, accessories, drinkware, and home decor, you name it, we make it. Get your favorite designs on any item for party favors, weddings, graduations, or any special occasion, all at affordable prices. What are you waiting for? Visit our website at trendingthings.com to order your trendy item today. Trending Things, bringing creativity to the things you love.
Are you a thriver or a survivor? Let's continue the conversation. What are some of your other coping mechanisms?
Oh my gosh, for sure. Writing is definitely one, not just because I'm a children's book author, but well before that, I was very into poetry and really dovetailing that with painting as well. I like to think of challenges as opportunities to explore. And what I mean by that is part of Ataxic CP deals with fine motor skills, and people would, growing up, there was a lot of shadow they tried to build into me, and the sense that it was, oh, your handwriting's so terrible. How can you read that? I never really bothered me. I can read it. Can't copy my notes. Can't read them. Like, it didn't really, and if I needed to turn something in for class, Lord knows that my mother and I fought tooth and nail for reasonable educational accommodations so that I had a word processor or something that I could type. I typed extremely fast as a result, which is very useful, obviously, now. But painting was really a good way for me to make friends with my bad handwriting. Let me put it that way. Where there wasn't this expectation of perfection that comes with letter forms. And then I fell down a rabbit hole of contemporary artists who also explored the art of glyph making or the art around sign making and semiotics. So like Cy Twombly or Rauschenberg or these other painters. And I realized that I wasn't the only person exploring these things through art. Maybe not, maybe one of the few that's doing it through a cerebral palsy lens, but at least this idea of how we make a mark and how we communicate in written form, the idea of abstracting that and then playing with that visually was really empowering to me and really helpful. And I would encourage anyone with a disability that is able, if there's an area of your disability that's, quote, a challenge, find some creative outlet. Maybe it's singing, maybe it's painting, maybe it's drumming if you're just tapping. Find some creative outlet that lets you put that energy somewhere, because it's all energy at the end of the day, whether that energy is anxious or not, whether that energy is positive or negative, it's all energy. And so for me, putting that energy into painting, great. Writing, fantastic. Storytelling in general and talking, great. Those have always been sort of my coping outlets. I would also say that from a very young age, as a member of the LGBTQ community, and as being raised Jewish. I did my first public speaking engagement when I was 14 years old, talking about anti-Semitism, and then a few months later was working on homophobia in the classroom as like a 14-year-old a couple of years after Matthew Shepard was killed. And so for me, coping with what should be a challenge is also about finding a way to tell the story that works for me, whether it's through a poem, a painting, a speech, advocacy in the community in terms of being an activist and putting boots on the ground. For me, that's what I like to do. Just put my energy into things that empower me. It's a choice.
Do you then think, because for you see challenges then as opportunities, that is why you're then thriving through adversities?
100%. 100%. But I will, for anyone who's listening, put an asterisk. Like I had a lot of privileges. I was very well educated. I came from a background where I was allowed the space to fail and make certain mistakes. I also am extremely articulate. I have a very good way with words, and I was made aware of that very, very young. Everyone around me kind of pushed me in that direction, and I said, okay, let's run with it. And so I viewed it as my job as someone who is well-spoken to speak for those who maybe are less well-spoken, who are from similar marginalized communities, whether that's the queer community, the disabled community, the Hispanic community, et cetera. It doesn't really matter. And so I understand fully that it may not be as easy for others as it is for me to find a way to tell a story, because the story is still bubbling up inside them. And so maybe your story energy doesn't come out that way. Maybe it comes out through hiking. I also am a big hiker, like super great coping skills, especially for someone with ADHD like myself, because you have that extra energy and it's got to go somewhere. And like, I'm like a puppy, you got to like take me for a walk sometimes.
Okay.
And I think thriving through adversity, no matter what flavor of adversity is about finding that channel. Like, what's your channel? Every one of us has one or more channels that we can put that energy in that's like organic to us. And I think discovering what that is the key for any type of adversity and any kind of thriving for anyone.
As we're wrapping though, I want you to tell me, how then has this mindset, this ability to see yourself as somebody thriving rather than just surviving, how has this then impacted on your relationships?
I think that it makes my relationship, when I come to the table of a relationship, I come to it from a place of extreme empathy, because I know what it's like to feel powerless. I know what it's like on a subconscious level, even talking about things I don't recall because I was like not even a year old. On a subconscious level, there is a baseline level of empathy that I think those of us who have struggled in a certain way can sort of reach deep down and find in most situations. I think that's my biggest thing. I think it all starts and ends with empathy. And I think that my particular blend of experiences have given me the gift of both empathy and then storytelling. And the combination of those, I think, is very powerful and is something that I think is a responsibility that I carry for the causes that I champion and for other people like myself in one or more than one way.
Okay. You said a lot. And if there's somebody who is watching, is listening, and they're still trying to process all of what you just said, because they're saying it's easy for him to say, he's had a lot of opportunities that I'm yet to, or probably won't ever have. What is the one idea you'd want to leave with listeners, viewers, about the whole idea of thriving through adversity?
The key to thriving through adversity is doing whatever work you have to do to find your authentic voice and the courage and capacity to then shout out with it in the direction of the things you want to be or do.
I'm not about to add anything to that. Thank you so much for sharing.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I hope your audience enjoyed a little ramble down the rabbit hole that is my existence.
Really. Thanks so much for sharing. This was Make It Last podcast with your host, Noreen Durrell. It's all about helping us to have better relationships, not just with ourselves, but with other people. Until next time.
You loving me, I loving you. Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life won't live in the past.